All right, let's dive into this. Logical form. It kind of sounds a little intimidating, right? But it's really about like, how do our thoughts and arguments really work? And we've got this awesome entry from Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy just on, you guessed it, logical form.
Yeah, it's really a really great resource for getting into this whole world of logic and language and thought, how they all kind of fit together.
So, okay, so like right off the bat, right? Some inferences feel like, oh yeah, totally, 100%. And then others are like, maybe not. What is it about, like, what's going on there? What makes an inference, like, as the text puts it, impeccable?
It's almost like building a house. You got to have that solid foundation, right? So with a really strong inference, the foundation is the argument's form. Like if the form is valid, then assuming the premises are true, the conclusion, it's got to be true too. No getting around it.
Okay, so it's like a structural integrity check for arguments. I like that.
Exactly.
So can you give us like an example of an impeccable inference?
Sure, sure. So imagine someone tells you, if it's raining, then the ground is wet. It's raining. What can you conclude from that?
Well, duh, the ground is wet.
Exactly. There's no two ways about it. And that's because it follows that bit of solid pattern called modus porens. If A, then BA is true, therefore B is true. And that pattern works, like no matter what A and B stand for.
So it's like having a universal blueprint for a solid argument. Like the content can change, but that structure, it guarantees the conclusion. I think the text mentions the Stoics were really into this whole pattern thing.
Yeah, the Stoics were like way ahead of their time. They understood that the strength of an inference was all about the form, not just the content. And they even went so far as to, create these diagrams for these patterns, using variables to represent propositions.
So like they were creating a logic decoder ring, basically. I love it. But okay, but the text also talks about risky inferences where like even if the premises are true, the conclusion might not be. So what's the deal with those?
Well, risky inferences, they usually come from like little tiny subtle shifts in the logical form. It's easy to miss them. Like, for example, if I said, if it's raining, then the ground is wet. The ground is wet. Does that mean it's raining?
Not necessarily. Like someone could have just like, been watering the plants or I don't know. So even though like those premises are true, the conclusion it doesn't automatically follow.
Exactly. The pattern there is different and it doesn't give you that guarantee.
Ah, so it's like a logic trap. The argument might sound good, but if you're not paying attention to the form, you could fall for it. And this actually makes me think about how the text talks about traditional grammar and how, it kind of struggles to capture all the nuances of logical form. Like, it's almost as if the way we talk can actually sometimes hide the real logic behind our thoughts.
Yeah, traditional grammar with its, big focus on subject and predicate, it can be a little misleading. It's like, take the sentence, every star twinkles. Dramatically, pretty straightforward. Every star, subject, twinkles, predicate. But, I mean, is that really capturing what's going on there logically?
Yeah, it's not just about like one star twinkling. It's like all the stars. There's something more complex happening there, and the grammar isn't really, showing it.
Exactly. That little word, ever, it's doing so much work. It's talking about a relationship that could go on forever across tons and tons of stars. And the old subject predicate way of thinking about it, it can't really handle that.
So it's like grammar is like a wolf in sheep's clothing. It looks all simple on the surface, but underneath it's hiding this like really complex logical structure. It's like we need like a super powerful tool to dissect these sentences and see what's really going on logically.
Right. And that's where this idea of function argument structure comes in.
Okay, yeah, for each, right.
Exactly. For each, who's like, hold on, the old way of doing logic, it's not cutting it. It's like, we got to think about this whole thing differently. Propositions, they're not about subjects and predicates. They're about functions and arguments.
Okay, I got to be honest, function argument structure. It sounds kind of heady. Can you give us like a real world example just to illustrate what this even means?
Sure. Think of like a vending machine. You put in a code, right? That's your argument, and then boom, out pops your snack, your output. So in Frige's system, that vending machine, it's like a function. It takes an input, and based on how it's programmed, it spits out a very specific output.
So instead of just saying Mary saying, we'd be like, okay, saying that's a function, and it's taking Mary as its argument.
Yeah. Like saying, and if the X is someone who actually saying, output's true. If not, it's false.
So it's like we're breaking down language into these tiny little building blocks of meaning, right? And those functions, they're like the rules that determine whether something's true or false. I'm starting to see how this is way, way more powerful than the old subject-predicate stuff, especially when you start talking about really complex sentences, the ones with all those quantifiers and relations. But, okay, but the text, it does mention that this kind of creates a bigger gap between, like, how we speak and the, like, real underlying logical form, right?
Yeah, Fried, she was very aware of that. He was like, natural language, it's messy, it's ambiguous. He was like, it can really obscure the true logic of what we're thinking. In fact, he actually created his own language, Begriffsschrift, just for representing those logical relationships as precisely as possible.
Wow, so it's like we need a special blueprint language just to capture all that logical complexity. But then the text goes on to talk about Bertrand Russell and his theory of descriptions. Can you tell us a bit about that? Like, what are descriptions and how did Russell kind of shake things up?
So think about a phrase like the tallest building in the world. Sounds simple enough, right?
Yep, pretty straightforward.
But Russell, he comes along and he's like, nope, descriptions, they don't work like names. They're not just pointing to some object out there in the world. He's like, there's way more going on logically.
Okay, so it's not just like, boom, there it is, the tallest building.
Nope, it's actually this whole combination of quantifiers and conditions. It's saying there's one and only one building that fits that description that's taller than every other building in the whole world. Subtle difference, but super important.
So it's like descriptions, they're these little packages of logical instructions.
Exactly.
They're not just picking things out, they're making these claims about like whether something exists, whether it's unique, all that.
Yeah, and this gets really interesting when you start talking about things that don't exist. Like that classic example, the present king of France is bald. Now, old school logic, it would kind of trip over that one, but Russell's theory, it's like, no problem, we got this.
This is where it gets really juicy. So like, how does Russell's theory handle that? What happens to the logic when you're talking about something that's not even there?
So Russell would say, look, that sentence, it's still meaningful, but it's false because it's saying there is a present king of France, and that's just not true. So the whole thing, it's got to be false.
So even a statement about like a non-existent thing, it still has this logical form that you can like analyze and evaluate. This is amazing. It's like we're peeling back layers of an onion here, just revealing more and more and more complexity in the way language works.
Yeah, and this is just the beginning. Like when it comes to logical form, there's a whole universe of philosophical debate out there about how best to represent these structures, how they relate to language, how they relate to thought, how they relate to like reality itself. So as we're, kind of wandering through this universe of logical form, it's important to keep in mind that there are actually different schools of thought on how to represent it best. Like take Rudolf Carnap, he was a big logical positivist, and he argued that logical form, it's not like something we just find lying around. He was like, it's partly a matter of choice, like a process of regimentation.
Regimentation, it sounds kind of intense, like we're going to like whip language into shape.
Not quite that drastic, but more like, choosing the right outfit. Like Carnap thought we could choose between different logical frameworks, each with its own way of, representing propositions. It's all about finding the best fit, whether it's for clarity or simplicity or, for science, making sure things are really rigorous.
So like choosing the right tool for the job. Right, like a carpenter wouldn't use a hammer to saw wood.
Exactly. But then you have Carnap's buddy, W.V.O. Quine. He comes along, and he's even more radical. He's like, you know what? There's actually no one right way to translate everyday language into this, perfect formal system of logic.
Whoa, hold on. So there's no like one true logical form. That sounds kind of like chaotic. Like, wouldn't that make it impossible to, understand each other? To even like communicate?
Well, Quine, he thought that the actual form we end up choosing, it's not like 100% determined by how people actually use language. He pointed to this problem with translation, right? Like translating between different languages. He was like, there are often tons of valid interpretations, and each one's going to have its own logical structure.
So there's a little wiggle room. It's not like totally fixed and objective.
Right, and this whole idea, it's called the indeterminacy of translation, and it was like a big deal in philosophy. It challenged this idea that meaning is like this solid, independent thing that it's out there waiting to be discovered.
This is making me rethink like everything I thought I knew about language. We just assume our words mean what they mean, right? But maybe it's all like a lot more fluid than we think.
And that's exactly why it's so important to, really explore logical form. It helps us see those little subtle ambiguities, those places where things could go wrong. It helps us be more uh, clear and precise in how we think and how we talk to each other.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, okay, speaking of clarity, the text, it mentions how, like modern linguistics, it's actually come up with some potential solutions to bridge this gap between like logical form and grammatical form. Specifically, this idea of restricted quantifiers. Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Yeah, so restricted quantifiers, they're a more, I guess you could say, intuitive way to represent the logical structure of sentences, especially when you're dealing with those pesky quantifiers, like every and some. It's like instead of thinking of them as these separate things floating around, we kind of tie them right to the noun phrases they're they're modifying.
Okay, I'm following so far. Can you give us an example just to see this in action?
Yeah, so imagine the sentence, every cat chased a mouse. So old school logic, it might represent that as like, for all x, if x is a cat, then there exists a y, such that y is a mouse, and x chased y. It gets a little wordy.
Yeah, it's like trying to read those old assembly instructions, like so many parts.
Right, but with restricted quantifiers, it's more like for every cat X, there's a mouse Y, such that X chased Y. So we're saying for each cat, there's a mouse that it chased. Much simpler.
Oh yeah, that's much clearer. It's like it actually makes sense, like how we'd actually say it.
And this approach, it kind of has this like ripple effect. It lets us represent these more complex sentences in a way that really mirrors the grammar and that makes it easier to see the connection between like the language and the logic.
It's like we're finally finding this common language between grammar and logic. Everything's starting to like click into place. But okay, the text, it doesn't let us rest for long. It then goes on to introduce this whole idea of transformational grammar and this distinction between like deep structure and surface structure. Can you tell us a bit about how those concepts fit in with, this exploration of logical form?
Yeah, so transformational grammar, this was Chomsky's baby. He's basically saying, look, the sentences we hear, they're not just these like simple strings of words. They're complex structures that have gone through this whole series of transformations.
So there's like this hidden depth to language. Like there's a whole grammatical play happening behind the scenes.
Right. Think of it like, a theater production. The surface structure, that's the final performance. That's what we see. But underneath it all, there's this deep structure, the script. That's where all the relationships between the characters and the plot, that's where it's all laid out.
So the words we hear, they're just the tip of the iceberg. There's this whole other level of structure underneath that's really driving the meaning.
Exactly. And this distinguishing, and it's super important for a logical form because sometimes, the surface structure, the way the words are actually ordered, it doesn't actually show the real logical relationships going on.
Okay, so can we see this in action? Can we get a sneak peek at this grammatical play?
Sure. So take the sentence, Mary seems to like John. Now, on the surface, it looks like Mary is the subject of seems, right?
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
But the deep structure, it actually reveals that Mary, she's actually the subject of like. That whole phrase, Mary likes John, it's kind of embedded inside the verb seems.
So Mary, she's like playing two roles in this whole grammatical performance.
Exactly. She starts out as the subject of like in the deep structure, but then she gets like promoted to the subject of seems in the surface structure. But she leaves a little trace behind in her original spot.
So it's like there's a grammatical sleight of hand going on. Like you can't just trust the word order to tell us the real logical story. But how do we uncover that deep structure? Do we need to become like linguistic detectives?
Well, linguists, they've come up with all these rules and principles for analyzing sentences and figuring out the deep structure. And they've also proposed this other level of representation. It's called LS, logical form, and it's derived from the surface structure, through a series of transformations. And one of the key ones is called quantifier raising.
Okay, so we've got surface structure, deep structure, and now LF. It's like linguistic Russian nesting dolls. Can you break down this LF for us? Like, how does it connect to all this logical form stuff we've been talking about?
Yeah, so think of LF as like a bridge between the grammar and the logic. It takes that grammatical structure and it transforms it into something that can be like usually mapped onto a logical representation.
So it's like LF is where grammar and logic finally meet. They shake hands. They're like, okay, we agree. This is how we're going to represent things.
Exactly. And that quantifier raising I mentioned, that's one of the big things that happens at LF. It's where those quantifiers, every sum, they kind of move up in the sentence, and that affects how the whole thing gets interpreted.
So it's like they're jockeying for position, and their final spot, it determines what the sentence really means. This is like a grand unified theory of language and logic. But okay, I remember you mentioning earlier that there's like some pushback against this whole covert movement thing, this LF idea. Are there other ways of thinking about how to handle these complex grammatical and logical relationships?
Oh, totally. Linguistics, it's a living, breathing field. There's always debate, there's always new ideas popping up. Some linguists are like, look, this whole covert movement thing, this separate LF level, it's too complicated. They think we can get the same results with other mechanisms.
So it's like scientists arguing about the best way to map the human genome, right? Different approaches, same goal, trying to figure out how this complex system works.
Exactly. But no matter what the specific theory is, this idea that the grammatical structure, it plays a crucial role in shaping logical form, that's become like a core idea in modern linguistics.
This has been such a mind-blowing exploration of how like grammar and logic, how they work together. Like we've seen how the surface can be so deceptive and how that deep structure, it's revealing those underlying relationships. And then LF, it's like the bridge, right? It's where they finally connect. But before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, I'm curious, I want to hear your thoughts on events, like how Donald Davidson, he brought this whole concept into the picture. How does that change how we understand logical form?
Oh, Davidson, he was a game changer. He was basically like, look, when we talk about actions, we should really think about them as events. Like instead of just saying John kicked the ball and thinking of that as just, John having some property, we analyze it as like there was a kicking event and John and the ball were involved.
So we're shifting from like static properties to like dynamic events. Like we're watching a movie instead of looking at a still photograph.
Exactly. And this is huge for logical form because now when we analyze actions as these events, we can actually capture how sentences relate to each other logically, and it's way more elegant, way more intuitive.
Can we see that in action? Can you give us an example of how this events thing makes the logic clearer?
Sure. So think about the sentences John kicked the ball quickly and John kicked the ball. Now, old school logic might have a hard time explaining why the second sentence follows from the first, but when you think about it in terms of events, it's simple. If there was a kicking event and it was quick, then there must have been a kicking event, period. Doesn't matter how fast it was.
Ah, I see. It's like the event, it makes the logic just like click into place. It's like we can see the causal chain so much clearer.
Yeah, and this approach, it fits perfectly with this big idea of semantic compositionality. This is basically the idea that, the meaning of a sentence, it's built up from the meanings of its parts and how they're put together.
So it's like we're building up the meaning brick by brick, starting with those basic events and who's doing what.
Right, and this compositional approach, this event-based analysis, it gives us this really powerful way to understand how the logical form of a sentence, it kind of emerges from the grammar.
This is incredible. It's like we're seeing how the logic of language, it's actually connected to like how we experience the world, how we think about it. We see things happening, those actions, they have a logic to them, and we can represent that logic through these events.
Exactly. And this connection between, our experience of the world and the logic of language, it's one of the coolest things about studying logical form. It reminds us that language isn't just this abstract system. It's a tool we use to make sense of our reality.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered so much ground here from like the ancient Stoics all the way to like modern like cutting edge linguistics. And it's amazing to see how logical form, it's not just some like abstract, philosophical thing. It's actually super practical. Like it helps us build better arguments, avoid those logic traps, and even communicate better. But like as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I kind of want to zoom out a bit. Like what does this all tell us about like the big picture? About how logic, language, and like our minds, how they all like fit together. Are we just uncovering something that's already there? Or is logical form more like a tool that we create?
Yeah, that's a question that philosophers have been wrestling with for like forever. Some folks, they follow in the footsteps of, Frege, Russell. They say logical form. It's like this window into how our minds actually work. Like they say our minds, they operate on these propositions, and those propositions, they have a structure, and that structure, it's basically like those formal representations we've been talking about.
So it's like our thoughts, they have this inherent logic to them, this structure that we can actually like map onto those formal systems.
Exactly. So from this point of view, understanding logical form, it's not just about analyzing arguments or, clarifying language. It's about understanding something really deep about how our minds, how they represent the world, how they reason about it.
That's pretty mind-blowing, actually. It's like logic. It's not something we just impose on our thoughts from the outside. It's like a reflection of how our minds naturally tick.
But of course, not everyone agrees with this. You have folks like Quine, Wittgenstein. They saw the value of logical form as a tool, but they were more skeptical about, whether it perfectly matched the structure of thought.
So for them, it's more like a scaffold, right? Like something we build to make sense of our thoughts, not necessarily a blueprint of the mind itself.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, maybe the mind works on a whole other level. Maybe it's using images. Maybe it's using associations, things that aren't strictly propositional. So logical form for them, it's a way to make those thoughts more explicit, to analyze them, but it's not like a perfect copy of how those thoughts originally existed.
So it's this ongoing debate, right? Is it a discovery or is it an invention? Is it a window into the mind or is it a tool that we create?
And that debate, I think it shows just how complex and mysterious the human mind really is. And, we may never have a final answer, but by exploring logical form, we get closer to understanding that intricate connection between language, thought, and the world around us.
This makes me think about meaning. Like we've talked about how grammar, how it contributes to logical form. But does logical form itself, does it like play a role in shaping meaning?
Oh, absolutely. That's a core question in the philosophy of language. One really influential view, this comes from Donald Davidson. He said that to really understand a sentence, you got to get its logical form. Like that's the key to understanding its meaning.
So it's not just about like the individual words, it's about how those words are like logically connected, how they create a complete thought.
Right. Davidson's big idea was that to understand a sentence, you got to know its truth conditions. Like what would have to be true in the world for that sentence to be true. And those truth conditions, they're determined by, you guessed it, the logical form.
That make a lot of sense. It's like the logical form, it's like a blueprint. It tells you how the sentence connects to the world, what would have to be the case for it to be, thumbs up true or thumbs down false.
And this idea, it's had a huge impact on formal semantics. That's the part of linguistics that uses logic to analyze meaning.
But I mean meaning it's such a like a rich complex thing. I can't imagine it's like completely determined by just logical form, right?
Of course, of course. Plenty of folks, philosophers and linguists, they're like, hold on, meaning it's way more than just truth conditions. They point out that sentences, they can tell you about the speaker's intentions, about like social contexts, emotion, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, like think about something as simple as like I'm fine. Like that could mean so many different things depending on like how you say it, where you say it, who you're saying it to.
Exactly. And this realization, it's led to, all these new semantic theories that are much more nuanced. They take into account like pragmatics, all those contextual factors. We got to get the literal meaning, sure, but also like where it's being said, what the speaker's trying to do, what kind of background knowledge the speaker and listener share.
So it's like meaning it comes from this really dynamic interplay, right? You've got the logic, you've got the language, and then you've got that whole social context.
Exactly. And this brings us right back to why studying logical form is so important. It gives us those tools, those conceptual scalpels to dissect all those interactions, to see the logical backbone of a sentence, and then to appreciate how all these other factors can enrich the meaning.
It's like having this amazing magnifying glass, right? We can zoom in on the tiny little details, and then we can zoom out and see the whole picture. It gives us this deep, rich understanding of how language, how it really works.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's really crucial to remember that studying logical form, it's not just some ivory tower exercise. This stuff, it matters. It affects how we think, how we communicate, how we make sense of the world.
Yeah, we've seen how understanding logical form can like make us better thinkers, help us avoid those logical fallacies, and even help us, get our point across more effectively. It's like we're upgrading our mental software. We've got these sharper tools now for dealing with the complexities of language and thought.
Exactly. And maybe most importantly, it makes us more aware, right? We're aware of the power of language, but also its limitations. It's like this constant reminder to be careful, to watch out for hidden assumptions, ambiguous wording, all those things that can lead to misunderstandings.
It's like language. It can be this incredible tool for clarity, but it can also be this source of confusion. And understanding logical form, it's like having this map, this guide to help us navigate that tricky terrain.
So as we come to the end of our deep dive here, I really encourage everyone keep exploring this stuff, keep asking questions, analyze those arguments, and just strive for that clarity and precision in how you think and how you communicate. It's a journey, it's an adventure.
This has been amazing. So many twists and turns, so many like aha moments. We've seen how logical form can really shine a light on those hidden structures of language and thought, how words and meanings, how they all come together to help us make sense of the world. And I really hope this has sparked something in you, a desire to keep questioning, to keep learning, to keep exploring the mysteries of how we think and how we communicate. Because there's always more to discover, always more to learn.